Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to the DGAP's morning briefing on geopolitical challenges. I'm Henning, Hoff, Executive Editor of Internationale Politik Quarterly. As DGAP Director Guntram Wolf explained last week, we have been somewhat rebranding and rejigging our morning briefing series, which we started on February the 24th. Going forward, do expect a rotating team of colleagues hosting this briefing on geopolitical challenges, while we will also expand our scope going beyond Russia's invasion of Ukraine in the future. This morning, however, we will once again focus on the geopolitical challenge facing Germany and Europe today, which is Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. We are writing day 189 of the invasion, so day 200 coming up in 2 days. Our discussion this morning will be particularly timely since we seem to be arriving at various junctures, possibly turning points. Having started a counter-offensive in the south, the Ukrainian armed forces seem to be having gained the initiative. Russia, in turn, seems to be on the defensive and has been forced to purchase drones from Iran and ammunition from North Korea in recent weeks. With Moscow cutting all gas supplies via the Nord Stream 1 pipeline and demanding the lifting of Western sanctions in return, there is also a new clarity in Europe's relationship with Russia. The Kremlin's move can certainly be read as a sign that sanctions are working. What is lacking, however, is agreement on how to deal with Russia in the longer term. As German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has been pointing out repeatedly in recent weeks, Russia, quote, will remain a threat to European peace and security for the foreseeable future. At the same time, Russian President Vladimir Putin has been making the concept of the Russian world, the Ruski Mir, his country's foreign policy doctrine. He is also turning east as he will be meeting Chinese President Xi Jinping for the first time since the war started at a summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, at the end of next week. To discuss all this and more, we are joined by two this morning to discuss this in order of appearance of coming back. My DGAP colleague, Dr. András Rácz, Associate Fellow at the Defense and Security Program at the German Council on Foreign Relations, and a leading expert on the Russian military. He will share his assessment of the military situation. Again, good morning, András.
Good morning, Henning. Thank you.
I would like to take this opportunity to point you to his recent analysis of the war available on the DGAP website. DGAP website, where you'll find his analysis of the recent behind-the-line attacks by presumably Ukrainian forces. I think the Ukrainian General Staff confirmed that it actually was a Ukrainian operation on Crimea. And you will also find on the DGAP website his and Christian Mölling's analysis of how the war is going, which the two of them provide to the ZDF television broadcaster. And it is my great pleasure to welcome Kadri, Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, ECFR, and a leading expert on Russia and Europe-Russian relations. Inter alia, Kadri has been writing very original articles for Internationale Politik Quarterly, which I can highly recommend. She will assess this morning the present state of EU policy vis-à-vis Russia. Each speaker has about 8 to 10 minutes for their remarks. We will be opening up for questions and comments after roughly 30 minutes. For the Q&A, please raise your hand and submit your question via the chat function. Please note that this event will be recorded and that we will have to close on time at 9:30 a.m. And last but not least, I would like to thank my dear colleague Milanic of the DGAP's Europe program, who has been instrumental in organizing and sort of orchestrating this series. But now, without any further ado, let's turn to András for his assessment.
Thank you, Henning. Good morning to all of you. Thank you for joining us again today morning. And here, just as we have done before the summer break, I'm trying to give a short overview of the main events in the military situation that have taken place since our last DGAP briefing, morning briefing, has taken place dedicated to the war in Ukraine. As during the summer, when it comes to strategic changes, the front line did not change too much when it comes at least to the strategic scale changes. However, there have been a number of important changes nevertheless. Probably the most important one was already mentioned by Henning, that from late July on, early August on, Ukraine gained a capability which enables Ukrainian armed forces to strike targets deep behind the Russian front lines. Earlier, the maximum depth Ukraine was able to hit targets behind Russia's front line was around 120 kilometers. This is the range of Ukraine's old inherited ex-Soviet Tochka missiles. However, in the last 6 weeks, Ukraine has demonstrated its capability to strike way beyond this distance. Russian military airports were hit in the Crimea, bridges were hit deep in the southern part of the Kherson region, and also other targets of military importance, such as ammunition depots and command posts, were also hit by some kind of a new Ukrainian capability. Whether it's a new missile, whether it's some kind of a special drone, it doesn't really matter. There is evidence pointing to the fact that there might be both missiles and drones used by Ukraine. From open sources, it's impossible to confirm whether it's either or possibly both. But what matters is that now Ukraine is able to strike targets much deeper behind Russia's front line than ever before. And this is having a detrimental effect on Russia's capabilities, particularly in the western front line in the Kherson region. The reason why this is hampering Russia's capabilities, because they had to withdraw their air forces to airfields much more back behind the front line. That's one thing. So aircrafts have to fly a longer time and can carry less payload. So this weakens Russia's air force, particularly in the Kherson region. And because of the same threat of Ukrainian deep strikes, they had to reorganize their logistics and also had to withdraw some of their command posts. Another change that it's public, it's confirmed that Ukraine obtained the US-made AGM-88 HARM anti-radar missiles, and these missiles allow Ukraine to significantly downgrade Russia's air defense capabilities, air defense and anti-aircraft capabilities. The recent counteroffensive in the Kherson region has already been building on this capability. And just as we've done before the summer, let's just try to share a map and see the actual developments taking place on the front line. So here now I'm trying to share my map, share my screen. Now you are supposed to see the map prepared by the Institute for the Study of War. This is the situation as it was yesterday evening, European time. As you see, on the strategic scale, not too many changes happened. But if we go deeper, we see a number of important changes. Let's take a look first to the south, to the Kherson region, where Ukraine's counterattack, which started on the 29th of August, has already been gaining ground. Ukraine originally started the attack in 5 different directions, and Ukrainian armed forces are skillfully shifting the focus of where they put pressure on the Russian front line. Contrary to many expectations, this counteroffensive is not going to be any kind of a blitzkrieg. Ukraine does not have either the tanks or the mechanized infantry forces necessary for any kind of blitzkrieg type of operation. So large combined armed formations swiftly moving deep into enemy territory. This is not going to happen. Instead, Ukraine's objective here seems to be to slowly and meticulously downgrade and grind the Russian forces located west of the river Dnipro. Why the Dnipro River is important here? Because Ukraine managed in the last 6 to 8 weeks by precision strikes, Ukraine managed to disable all the 3 bridges crossing the Dnipro. So the Antonovsky Bridge here at Kherson, the Antonovsky Railway Bridge slightly further north, and the bridge over the Novakhovka hydropower plant. Right now, Russian forces west of the river Dnipro are almost completely isolated from the rest of the Russia-occupied territories. Russia is trying to use ferries, trying to use makeshift pontoon bridges, but none of them have the capability necessary for supplying the Russian contingent of approximately 20,000 soldiers located west of the Dnipro. So Ukraine's strategy is that instead of a blitzkrieg, they are capitalizing on Russia's logistical hardships and slowly downgrade the Russian forces here in this part of the Kherson region. The likely endgame here is that the Russian military presence in the west of Kherson region should become unsustainable over a certain period of time. While military successes on the map don't seem to be yet too significant, though on the tactical level they are, the most important achievement Ukraine has already scored. Separatist authorities, I mean authorities in quotation marks of course, in the Kherson region, they declared that the so-called referendum on the Kherson region joining the Russian Federation has been postponed for an infinite period of time, simply due to the worsening security situation. So even if the Ukrainian offensive stops right today, it won't, but if, and a very important success has already been achieved. The separatist referendum planned to take place on the 11th of September. So basically this Sunday is not going to take place, at least not now. So Ukraine won considerable time here. And now just move to the other front line, which has become very exciting 2 days ago. This is the Kharkiv region, so north of the Donbass. Here in the Kharkiv region, the day before yesterday, Ukraine launched a surprisingly efficient counterattack, capitalizing on the fact that Russia had to move considerable forces from the eastern front to the west, to the Kherson region. So Russian positions here around Kharkiv, south of Kharkiv, have become weaker, and Ukraine is or has launched a surprisingly efficient and swift counterattack. Ukrainian forces gained already a territory of more than 400 square kilometers, went pretty deep into the Russian-held territories, and right now they are threatening to cut the ground lines of communication of the Russian forces fighting here in the Izium region. So right now the Ukrainian objective is that with this circle keep moving eastwards, and cut the supplies of the Russian forces here. If they succeed, Russia will have to withdraw its forces further east, so the pressure on the Donbass is likely to decrease. This is an ongoing story. We don't know how successful the Ukrainian counterattack will be, but based on the experiences of the first 2 days, they are moving forward with a surprising speed. So finally, there is some good news here from the Kharkiv region. That's it from me for the start. Henning, thank you again. And if there are any questions coming, I try my best to answer them. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, András. Maybe one quick comeback question. Why do you think, or what is the main explanation for these Ukrainian successes as they appear at the moment? Sort of, is this basically a lack of manpower that the Russians were sort of forced to move to thin out their lines, and that was sort of created this opportunity? Is that right?
Exactly, lack of manpower. I mean, during the summer, not only Ukraine, but also Russia has suffered serious losses, and the Russian Federation is officially still not at war. The status of the conflict is still just a special military operation, meaning that Russia is not mobilizing on a compulsory basis. Russia has been ramping up its recruitment efforts. Every federative subject of the Russian Federation, and there are 85 of these federative subjects, every region is obliged to set up at least one volunteer battalion. Some of these volunteer battalions are already moved to the front line. And of these new volunteer units, Russia is setting up a whole new Third Army Corps of the Russian ground forces. And they already started to deploy these new army corps. But these volunteer units have a much lower combat value. They didn't really have time to train in larger formations. So Russia is still struggling with the shortage of manpower. And in order to counter Ukraine's counteroffensive in the Kherson region, they redeployed considerable forces from the Eastern Front to the Western Front. And now Ukraine is taking a good use of this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Let's now turn to Kadri, please, for her comments.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My pleasure to be here. I was asked to speak about Russia-EU relations, especially in the context of gas cutoffs and sanctions. Thankfully, I have been working on those matters recently. I'm writing another EU-Russia power audit for ECFR. What we call power audit, that basically means that we have sent questionnaires to all member states, to our national researchers who provide us answers based on their interviews with the political class of the country. And I'm just reviewing data that is coming in. Not everything is in, but I have a good enough picture. And to summarize it, I would say that the EU's outlook is fairly melancholic. No one knows where this war will end. However, it does not translate into defeatism. Rather the opposite in many ways. I have not prepared slides, sadly. I didn't know András would have that, otherwise I would not have wanted to be worse. Now, however, you have to bear with me. I will just go through my data and give you some insights into some questions. Well, first on sanctions. What is your country's view on Western sanctions on Russia? 70% of those who have responded say that sanctions are robust and sensible. We should stick to them, but not necessarily increase. So the view is that sanctions are also sustainable. People are not giving up, and they certainly are not succumbing to Russia's blackmail. One caveat might be that actually the answers were provided, or our researchers worked over summer. Situation may have worsened somewhat now. One is seeing demonstrations in some European countries. I wouldn't exclude that the reality now is maybe slightly more worrisome than at the time of when they replied. But anyway, I think the picture is robust enough. There are some countries that want the sanctions to increase. There are some who say that sanctions don't work because Putin's calculations are no longer influenced by economic realities, which I think is correct. But none of them anyway says that sanctions should be decreased. And that makes me puzzled about Russia's behavior. If Putin thinks that Europe really would cave in to his economic blackmail, to be honest, I do not see that happening. Even if you allow that in some countries, maybe hardships will cause governments to collapse, new elections, more Russia-friendly governments taking place, that could happen in some countries. However, it's hard for me to imagine that happening on a big enough scale to actually influence EU's policy. I don't think that France and Germany are in any danger in that respect. And also the bulk of others. And so that means that single countries going soft, if they do, and that's a big if, I don't think that will actually derail EU's policy as a whole. Let me just have a look what else we have asked and what might be interesting to give you some taste of. We asked if a war came as a shock, and it's interesting to know that it did. I mean, 60% of respondents said that, yes, we heard warnings of the US intelligence, but even so, we didn't think such a large-scale war was possible. And there is a minority who thought that risk could have happened. How far could the war spread? Yet again, 66%, the big majority thinks that the war will be restricted to Ukraine, but European countries will be hit by economic consequences and refugee flows. And that is, of course, exactly what is happening for now. We asked about concerns about escalation to the nuclear level. Most are not very concerned. 42% says that escalation is not in Russia's interests. Another 30%, though, think that if conventional forces get stuck, Russia could use tactical nuclear bomb in Ukraine. So it's slightly mixed view there. So what else? Yes, where does that war end? No clear picture. I mean, stalemate is the choice that got most hits in our questionnaire, but many say too early to tell. They do not know. Even so, the majority of countries think that diplomatic contacts with Russia still have their use. As we know, Europe has had debate about whether it makes sense to call to Putin or not. Some countries have been heavily critical of other countries' leaders making phone calls to the Kremlin. But still the majority says that efforts for diplomatic solutions should be made constantly, regardless of evidence of success. 57%, but 42% say that for now weapons speak as long as the terms of peace are fought out on the battlefield. Diplomacy has little role. We asked about outside powers that could play a mediator role. Picture is fairly bleak. Turkey gets some ticks in that box. The US and China, very little. Majority says that no one. And that is probably correct. As we see, even Turkey's mediation success has been limited to very concrete, limited questions, such as grain exports. It doesn't look like anyone can really make any difference when it comes to conflict as a whole. Contacts with Putin, yes, the same as earlier. The majority thinks that they have limited use but should not be dropped. Where melancholy comes in, we asked about the post-Cold War international order, and 57% of replies admit that in our political rhetoric, we adhere to the standards of a liberal international order, but deep down we know that the era has changed and it cannot be restored. 33, though, think that the order as it used to be before the war can honestly be restored, and they see it as the sincere goal. If I use my own analysis, I think they are wildly optimistic. I would go with the majority, but well. And we asked about Ukraine's post-war security arrangements. Everyone says too early to tell. Well, not everyone, but most, 80%. And that sort of characterizes the whole picture. The future is widely open and people's views are not very optimistic about it. At the same time, countries seem to have been sufficiently mobilized short term, and ready really to do their best to tackle the hardships of the coming winter. So yes, to sum up, again, I do not know what Russia's calculation here is. When I look at Putin's speeches or public appearances, he does not look like a man who thinks he's losing, even though his army is doing less well than they used to, less than clearly than he hoped for. And mood in Europe is also more bullish than is good to Russia. It could be that Russia is misreading some of the developments. They often do. That would explain it. But yes, Putin's analysis is hard to explain. And as we've seen, sometimes it's further off reality than we would think. I will finish here.
Thank you very much, Kadri, for sharing these fascinating insights. Maybe also interesting that most Europeans still think that talking to Putin, there's a sort of makes some sense, even if limited. I heard that there's another phone call sort of coming up between Chancellor Scholz and Putin the next day. But maybe before we open up to questions, comments from our audience. Sort of, would you share this sort of rather optimistic view that the European publics seem to be displaying in terms of Europe or the EU really being united in this, and that there's probably no way that Russian propaganda or other efforts can really sort of split the EU in a meaningful way? I think that the sort of the country most attention is being paid to is of course Hungary, with the sort of Viktor Orban playing a very sort of his very own game in relations to Russia, but there are sort of other countries which some people are worried. Last week we briefly mentioned Italy, or not. We also looked at Italy actually, where a new incoming government is likely at the end of September with forces which are quite sort of pro-Putin, or at least used to be. What is your sense, sort of going beyond the polls? Sort of, what is your feeling about this question of European unity being strong enough to come through the winter?
Well, I need to say that my contacts with policy insiders paint a slightly more worrisome picture than comes across from the questionnaire. But I need to stress this is not public opinion polling. The data that I shared with you is actually also views of policymakers as interviewed and summed up by national researchers. So it doesn't reflect public opinion. It reflects elite opinion and or decision maker opinion. That needs to be stressed. Even so, one of my colleagues just returned from a retreat in her country's government, and in that role she was part of some of decision making, or could witness it from close by, and she was a lot more worried that yes, governments are worried about public mood, energy supplies, everything. So it could be that, I mean, what it boils down to in many countries also is relationships between politicians and their publics. I mean, we saw that recently when Olaf Scholz had his meeting in, I think it was Essen. I read a report in the Financial Times where he engaged in serious arguments about Germany's policy with members of the public. So I think that sort of exchanges and become much more necessary and in focus in the times to come, because it is obvious that publics are worried about their own livelihood. So it's up to the elites to explain why we need to take that hardship, why what we are doing is necessary. I think Scholz did it well, but of course that I think was only a start. There is much more to come.
Many thanks, Kadri. I think it's time to open up to questions, comments from you, everybody. Please raise your hand. I see already Eileen with the first question, and Peter Linke as well. So let's start with Eileen, please.
Good morning, and thanks to both of you for your excellent insights. I have a question for Kadri. Now that it's blatantly clear that Russia is using gas, and particularly the Nord Stream 1 gas pipe, as a tool of blackmail, after the Kremlin has admitted that it will only continue full supply if and when Western sanctions are lifted, do you think that Europeans, in concert with the Americans, could sort of pursue an approach of all gloves are off, in a sense, in terms of not only maintaining economic sanctions, but also in terms of the deliverance of heavy weapons and more weapons that are needed, or that are needed in Ukraine in order to fight back Russians? Thank you.
Thanks. I think when it comes to weapons deliveries, the NATO countries will still be watching out not to end up in direct conflict with Russia. So I think the restrictions, such as the demands that Ukraine not use HIMARS to bomb Russian territory, I would assume that these will remain in place. As to the rest, I don't see weapons deliveries decreasing either. Rather, they might somewhat increase, given that Ukraine also uses them very well, as we are seeing. But of course, this question, and I don't have knowledge to reply that, about production capacities, because weapons industry is not designed to wage a long-term classical war. We all thought that this was a thing of the past. So my colleagues who work on these things say that it will be hard to maintain supply of weapons purely from the industrial viewpoint. I don't know how shall we solve that. But otherwise, from the political point of view, I would suggest that there could be slight increase, but some caveats, will remain in place.
Thank you very much, Kadri. András, please come in with another point on public opinion.
Thank you. Just one more thing to the question of the public opinion and the sustainability of the EU support provided to Ukraine. We are in a lucky situation because the newest Eurobarometer survey has just came out literally 2 days ago. So please allow me to again share my screen, if the host can enable me to share my screen. The survey, and here is the most relevant page of it, page 18. Now you should see the survey, right? What's interesting, one needs to look at the EU average and the questions asked: humanitarian support, welcoming the refugees, financial support, economic sanctions, banning media, and military support. And the interesting thing is that, I mean, it's a bit of a rough methodology, but still, if we take the EU average and see whether there is any country which massively stands out. And the bad news is that, yes, there is one country. The surprising news that it's not Hungary, it's Bulgaria. Dear colleagues, look at the Bulgarian numbers. When it comes to humanitarian support and welcoming the refugees, Bulgaria is slightly below the EU average, but still more or less in line. Financial support, the difference is already substantial. When it comes to sanctioning Russian individuals, only the minority of the Bulgarian society is supportive. And when it comes particularly to military aid, only 35% of Bulgarians are in favor, while the EU average is more than 2/3. And Bulgaria is going to have snap elections on the 2nd of October. So here, interestingly enough, it's not Hungary to watch the most. but Bulgaria, because there is quite a chance that a more pro-Russian government will come to power after the government of Prime Minister Petkov fell in early summer, and that new pro-Russian, supposedly pro-Russian Bulgarian government taking into use the very low public support, particularly for certain type of EU support to Ukraine, might be, if not torpedoing the sanction, the EU support, but weakening the EU support. So here, this is a very useful statistics, brand new, and Hungarian government is problematic, but when it comes to the public opinion, the Bulgarian public is the most problematic, at least based on the Eurobarometer data. Sharing over, thank you.
Thank you very much, András. And so, sort of personally speaking, it's a relief to see that the numbers for Germany are sort of much better than you might think if you just spend too much time, as I do often on Twitter. So let's turn to Peter Linke, please. Your question.
Yes, just one small question. I don't know whom to address it. Maybe to Ms. Liik or Mr. Hoff. So the question is about the Far Eastern Economic Forum, which took place for the last 3 days in Vladivostok. And I'm asking because it has some relevance in terms of formulating Russia's foreign policy more than in the previous years. So could you give me your assessment of the outcome, of the results of the Far Eastern Economic Forum, as far as Russian international relations are concerned, especially the relationship to India?
Thank you very much. I don't know, Kadri, would you want to try to tackle this? I mean, it's
just very briefly and superficially. I also haven't looked deep into details of that, but that of course fits into a well picture of Russian foreign policy, that they are trying to cultivate non-Western relationships with all kinds of countries with several aims. I mean, one is economic. Of course, they want buyers to Russian productions know that they cannot sell much to the West any longer. They also need imports. There are certain things that countries other than the West could provide them to replace Western imports that they have lost. But of course, also politically, they want us to see that Russia is not isolated, that maybe the West is isolated, that the rest of the world is still with Russia, or at least demonstrate some understanding. I don't think that is only a sort of PR policy, or it's, I think some of them, and that may well include Putin, are honestly thinking that actually the importance of the West is declining, and the future of the world will be defined by other powers or by a concert of powers where the West plays a minor role and being maybe in antagonism with most others. So I think overall the bet in Russia is that I think they have given up on attempts to repair their relationship with the West, but the hope is that it will not matter, because the role of the West will not be as big as it used to, or crucial in any way for Russia. And I would see, the Far East Economic Forum sort of in this context.
Thank you very much, Kadri. Philip Hilsemensel is next.
Thank you very much. I have a question to both András and Kadri. To András, have you seen any evidence of Russia trying to degrade the Ukrainian energy and specifically the power infrastructure? As far as I understand, Ukraine is still exporting electricity to the European grid because of, for those not in the energy space, Ukraine has about twice or 3 times the capacity of electricity generation it needs. how is that being affected? I read very little about that. How is that being affected by the occupation of the Zaporizhzhia power plant? Obviously, they had to shut down. Have there been any attempts by the Russians to use precision weapons to bring down the transmission grid? And to Kadri, maybe I missed it. But what's your assessment of the sensitivity of European leaders or European elites towards ever higher energy costs? Is there a point where you feel they might pull a brake, or is it even that, with energy costs skyrocketing in the way they have, that it sort of produces a rally round the flag effect? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the questions. Maybe András first.
Thank you for the questions. When it comes to Russia's efforts to downgrade Ukraine's conventional energy infrastructure, this is apparently not among the Russian military objectives, or not yet. In the very beginning of the offensive, they fired precision missiles at one of the Kiev power plants, temporarily downgrading the energy supplies of the capital. But after that, Ukraine's power infrastructure remained largely intact. They are not shooting at the normal power plants. They are not shooting at the high voltage transmission systems. They are not destroying the local heating plants. They might start it, we don't know. But in the last 7 months, or almost 7 months, they seem to refrain from that. One of the reasons is that Russia is actually running really short of precision missiles. And there is a hierarchy of targets. And as long as you don't have enough precision missiles, you have to prioritize military targets of higher value than just conventional power plants. Second, particular large-scale power plant cannot be disabled by a single hit. You really have to fire a large number of missiles on it in order to take it out from service for a longer time. And third, particularly since Ukraine obtained this long-range precision strike capability, Ukraine could actually strike back. And it seems to be that there is kind of a mutual deterrence in some aspects regarding which types of targets do the Russians and the Ukrainians attack. Both sides refrain from attacking bridges of really strategic importance. Ukraine is not hitting bridges in the Russian Federation. Russia is not really hitting the bridges of the Dnipro, either in Dnipro, Zaporizhzhia, or Kiev. Another thing they refrain from hitting are conventional power plants. Russia could hit Ukraine's conventional power plants basically throughout the country, but Ukraine could also reach Russian power plants in the Belgorod region, Voronezh region, and a number of other regions. They are refraining from it. So it seems to be that the conventional deterrence logic has some kind of a stabilizing effect when it comes to the selection of targets. Of course, this might change from day one to day two, but so far this balance seems to be more or less working. Thank you.
Thanks, András. Kadri, maybe the other question, and can I sort of squeeze in one question from the chat from Ambassador Baumgarten? He points out that the Eurobarometer numbers András has sort of quoted also shows that Greece is not so far from Bulgaria. This is sort of in your sort of polling from experts, which, sorry, I sort of misrepresented somewhat. Is Greece also sort of an odd one out, or did you sort of what's your view on this question?
Greece is also odd one out, but Bulgaria is the country which will soon have the elections. Bulgarian elections are going to take place in 3 weeks from now. So that's why the Bulgarian story seems to be more acute for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Kadri, please.
Yeah, no, in my experience, I mean, each country has nuances of thinking, and so the picture is really multi-layered, but I think on the level that I am researching things, it sort of desire for European unity comes across. So many countries swallow their misgivings on various issues because they want to remain sort of joined with others. And I'm not sort of using it in some sort of pompous way. European unity is a value in itself. It is because countries have to gain from that on other issues. It's not sort of idealistic position even, but it's pragmatic in another way. So yeah, the way we see it in terms of sort of views and statements, Hungary is guided by different thinking. Yet again, of course, Bulgarian answers came in under the previous government. So things are, of course, shifting and changing all the time. And as to whether governments are worried, of course they are. I think they all are. Some are worried about their national energy supplies because, some, as Germany, are deeply exposed to Russian energy and cannot replace it so easily. Then there are some who are not dependent on Russia, but still they will be hit by rise in the world markets that will fuel inflation all over. So everyone is worried, but as of now, it seems to me that it's not translating into sort of defeatism or let's try to make up and be friendly with Russia. It's translating into frantic activity. We are working 24/7 to find solutions. And you see it. I mean, you see all sorts of proposals coming, price cap on Russian oil and gas, new connections, ramping up nuclear power, finding new suppliers. I haven't looked at statistics of where people go and visit, but my hunch is that countries like Turkmenistan, for instance, get a lot more foreign visitors than has been the case for a number of years, and likewise the Middle East and so forth. And of course, I mean, that brings its own dilemmas. What we are seeing on bigger political level also is that overall Western policy and the standards it tries to uphold are now clashing with the needs of the day. I mean, Joe Biden had to go to Saudi Arabia. I don't think that the widow of Khashoggi liked it very much. So these sorts of dilemmas will be there for the time to come. But yes, what I see, there is huge worry, but that's translating into huge activity.
Thank you very much. Let's bring in Milanic into conversation. Milan, please.
Good morning, everybody. One comment, if you allow me, and then a question. The comment is, Kadri, I have a feeling that what we are discussing now and the numbers from your research and the data is a rehearsal before it will go dramatically in much more sort of acute. Before the numbers will change and the data will change, we will see a very hot autumn. Russia stopped Nord Stream 1 to Germany in last few days because they evaluated that Germany quite successfully has filled in its gas storages, so that the squeeze of Russian gas that is coming would not be effective, and they want to keep that pressure. So I think there will be two things happening which will have an effect on public opinion. That is, on the one hand, a squeeze of Russian gas, and at the same time, support of pro-Russian groups in all our countries to go on street to protest, as happened in Prague last weekend. And the organizers of that Prague demonstration that caught attention of all Europe was the unreformed Communist Party, which is outside of the parliament, which is directly sort of paid from Moscow. But now my question is about EU unity and visas. The whole question of visas. We didn't touch an initiative that came from also your country, Kadri, Estonia and the Baltics and Poland, to restrict quite sort of easy and liberal regime from 2007, an agreement that allowed Russian tourists to come to the EU with a very simplified sort of Schengen visa procedure. And on top of a political agreement among EU foreign ministers to suspend that 2007 agreement, the Baltic Three want to go further. I think they just agreed that they will have a negotiated sort of separate solution. Also, they're arguing that they're on the border with Russia, so they are hit by as the air traffic stopped by high numbers. But something else took place from initiative from Hungary, András country, which didn't get that much attention. There are these individual visa bans, more than 1,200 individuals and over 108 entities that were put on the visa list for asset freeze and visa ban in the 6-7 packages of sanctions. And they were routinely up for a renewal for 6 months. EU ambassadors discussed it yesterday. Deadline for renewal is next week. And Hungary raised objection to 3. They wanted to delist 3 Russian oligarchs, and they threatened by veto. Now, there was an agreement with Hungary that they will withdraw their threat of veto and the request to delist these 3 oligarchs. They were quite big fishes, and none of them had business in Hungary. And it came after Viktor Orban quietly went to Moscow to attend the Mikhail Gorbachev funeral last weekend as the only EU leader. But my question is actually, what do you see happening on both sides? András, an attempt from Hungary to put a hole into EU unity on sanctions, and Kadri, do you see a risk that if the Balts will move too much in their own direction, that this will also challenge EU unity? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Milan. Maybe András first.
Thank you. I have to confess, I do not have any insight into the top Hungarian decision-making system, so I can only guess. When Hungary threatened to veto the EU sanctions over Patriarch Kirill on the 1st of June, back then I didn't understand what the story was about. Right now, with Budapest apparently trying to make the next steps, the story with Kirill already starts making sense. Budapest was testing the EU unity. And Kirill went through, he's not on the sanctions list. Now with the 3 oligarchs, including one of the strongest ones, Usmanov, this has been hopefully too much. So Hungary withdrew its pressure or its intention to press the EU for the removal of these 3 oligarchs. When it comes to the motivations, as far as it can be reconstructed from open sources, Hungary is really, really concerned about the availability of natural gas supplies for the winter. Even though the Turkey stream keeps operating, Budapest might well get into a critical situation, particularly if a harsher winter comes. So right now, the Hungarian diplomacy vis-à-vis Russia is dominated by the intention to make sure, with all the possible means, to get as much gas as possible. Financial price doesn't matter. Minister of Economics Marton Nagy was just in Moscow, purchased some extra quantities of gas. The price constitutes a state secret. It's much more expensive, reportedly, than the market price. So right now, it seems to be that Hungary is ready to pay any price and make any concessions in order to secure that gas keeps flowing. So this is right now a situation when, due to various reasons, Budapest is really not feeling safe about the availability of the necessary energy supplies for the winter. So this might explain this gig on these 3 Russian oligarchs as kind of a motivation. And again, none of these 3 oligarchs, neither Usmanov nor Aven nor the 3rd one, have any significant business in Hungary. So removing these 3 oligarchs from the list would not directly serve Hungarian interest. It's not about that we're banning a Russian businessman who's an important player on the Hungarian market. No, they aren't.
Thank you very much, András. Kadri, please.
Yes, well, on numbers, on the outlook being more optimistic, maybe I cannot exclude it. I would assume that actually a shortage of gas this winter and autumn was actually priced in into thinking when we got our answers. But of course, there could be some hope that the situation can be mitigated medium term, and somehow severe economic crisis and recession to be averted. So if that's not the case, let's see what happens to politics. I'm not insisting on visa bans. Yeah, it is true that on visa bans, Europe is not united, and the Baltic states somehow seems to think that it's a good idea to put pressure on Europe by going to extreme of not letting Russian tourists in. What will happen after that? I think Finland will see bigger influxes because they can still enter Finland. I'm not a fan of the proposal myself. I think too many innocent people will be hit in various ways. I think Finnish approach in that regard is better, that to decrease the number of future visas, make conditionality more strict, but not to declare the visas we have issued invalid. I also feel uncomfortable about that. I mean, of course, each country has sovereign right to prevent anyone from entering its territory, visa or not. I'm not disputing that, but even so, visa is something the countries themselves have given out to make them all invalid. I don't feel good about it. So there we are. But that said, I also think that, I mean, the Baltic states, they also value EU unity and sort of possibility to reach common positions. They have adopted that tactics of sort of blackmailing or putting pressure where they can. And visa issue is, thanks to geography, where the Baltic states can establish facts on the ground without consulting others. I dispute the wisdom of it, but I think there is a limit to it nonetheless, because they are interested in staying in talking terms, because on many other issues, other countries have upper hand, and the Baltics need support and solidarity there. So I wouldn't also over-dramatize it, but yeah, I don't like it either.
Thank you very much, Kadri. We have one more question, which is probably then the last question. If not anybody else wants to use the last 3 minutes we have remaining to jump in, but it's now the turn of Boris Ginsburg, who has waited very patiently. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I have actually the same question as Mr. Nietzsche about the so-called visa ban, which is actually just a toughening of the visa regime. And Ms. Liik already actually answered my question. I would like to know what is your personal opinion on it. So maybe because I'm specialized on sanctions in my dissertation. If you allow me, I would make one last comment about the visa ban, and I think it's very important to mention it because many people forget it. I think that this whole so-called visa ban is a huge mistake because as an upcoming Eastern Europe expert, I think it's important to know what is happening in Russia at such tense times. So if such a toughening of the visa regime is happening, then there's the risk that we will from now on, even know less than before. And I don't think that this whole topic of the visa ban is actually something that will bring us further. We should know now even more about what is happening in Russia, not less. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You sort of bring up a point which was also on my mind, and maybe we can make this sort of the question for Kadri's and András' final remarks. The situation or the feeling in Russia. There was also a very interesting interview in Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung with the head of the Nevada Center, who had a very nuanced picture, much more nuanced, and sort of we had this sort of really sort of black and white discussion about, is it Putin's war, is it Russia's war, is sort of in how far do Russians support the war? But maybe Kadri as a long-term Russia watcher, and maybe András, you also sort of, what is your reading of what is sort of Russian society? Where are we, and sort of how resilient is that society? Kadri, please.
Thank you. Well, I think there is still considerable resilience. I mean, people are supporting the existing policies, or the majority of people. There are, of course, those who, the minority that differs on that, but they support it, partly because they support the war they see on TV. And those who are dependent on Russian TV, I think their notion of what is happening is fairly drastically different from what we see. We have to keep that in mind. Alternative information will reach them in small quantities and is not necessarily believed. And of course, you know, Russia is a top-down country. There is always that tendency that they support the man at the top. To massively protest against the government is very, very rare in Russia. And the thinking there is that this has done nothing good. I mean, last time it happened in the 1990s, the reputation of 1990s is very bad in Russia. That said, I don't think it is still sustainable, because, you know, the levels of utter stupidity of official propaganda, the absurd that is happening, I don't see Russia long-term existing with that either. I mean, the kinds of things they are doing, these used to be ridiculed publicly in the Soviet Union, but I remember the latter years of it. So my inner clock says that if those kinds of things are happening, then the end must be near. And then I ask myself the question, is my inner clock correct? That maybe the current Russia is, maybe they are not like the Soviet Union, but I remember. Could it be that this is much more cynical country that doesn't care, that doesn't sort of uphold even nominal truths? I mean, in the Soviet Union, you couldn't get arrested for slogan peace to the world. Nowadays, easily, happens all the time. So, yeah, I do not know, but something inside me simply refuses to believe that a country like Russia will continue existing within these sort of utterly ridiculous frames for all its internal debate.
And just one more thing to add when it comes to the public support. Levada data and also interviews with Levada researchers confirm that when it comes to the support in the Russian population, there is a massive generational gap. Elderly population seems to be much more supportive of the war than the younger ones. I'm not a sociologist myself, so all I can say here is that this generational gap actually matters when it comes to the sustainability of the military effort. Because the younger people who are supposed to volunteer for the army, they are unwilling to volunteer. That's why Russia is facing serious problems in manning its units and replacing its losses. And even though God knows how many pensioners are in favor of the war, militarily, they are not much of use. Those young people whose place should have been in the army, according to Russian general staff, they are unwilling to go. And this is long-term degrading the sustainability of Russia's military effort in Ukraine. It's not going to collapse tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, but the long-term sustainability is going down. I hope this helps. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with this sort of, well, shall we say optimistic, or maybe a sort of at least sort of as an assessment which sort of points us to the fact that probably things will not stay as they are. I bring this meeting to a close. Thank you very much, Kadri, András, Rácz, for your insights and for again a fascinating discussions with our audience. I wish you all a very good morning and see you next week. Goodbye.